virtual simulation as a means of child development and interaction. What do you have kind of like a moral stance on this, or do you feel that you're appealing to the work? Because you know there's kind of like a morality inherent in any of those in that discussion. You know, even what you're saying there, people are worried about this. It's something people talk about in terms of kind of like this kind of Victorian fear, the loss of innocence of a child. Could you talk about how you deal with that in your work, maybe?
I try and deal with that. I mean, I try and sort of fight these kind of taking these kind of moral stances by being very aware of the different arguments that are out there. I mean, I think that by basically doing a lot of research, I'll put myself as a distraction. So you know, I think it's something that you've constantly got to be aware of. So you know, I talked a little bit about that. I mean, you know, everybody has their own moral parameters, and I think that's interesting, especially in something like with human sexuality, or with childhood, or with any sort of subjects which have various taboos around them. You know, it's important to be very aware of the whole kind of sort of panoply of kind of sort of attitudes. You know, people come at the subject from very different sort of positions. But you know, in my work, I try to. I mean, it might be wrong to say this. I mean, I feel I try and take a fairly kind of sort of distanced view. I mean, in a way, you know, what I've tried to do is sort of document. When I say document, I mean I've documented things as I've seen them, obviously. You know, which has a strongly sort of subjective sort of element. But I think that's what artists do. They bring their own sort of it's a combination of subjectivity and sort of objectivity. I've never really been a massive kind of sort of. I find documentary practice quite problematic sometimes in that respect. You know, I mean, I think that either work has a sort of an emotional honesty or sort of psychological honesty for me, or it doesn't. That's real. That's reality for me. You know, that's what I strive for in my work, is some point of recognition in the viewer, and that I consider to be documentary practice. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? But I mean, it's never really. I'm just trying to think of artists who've worked with children. I mean, I think it's always interesting that there isn't more sort of critical writing in Roger Ballard's work, actually. You know, I think that was sometimes quite problematic in terms of sort of image of the child, or Tierney Gearan's, that she came in for a lot of kind of problems. She photographed her own children naked. I mean, I think it's nudity. And Sally Mann herself was, you know, in the early years, there was some sort of critical sort of writing on her work. Again, I think that's very much to do with anxiety over the naked body, and that goes back to sort of Carol's representation of Alice Liddell, you know, at the very beginning, sort of photographing children. So from the birth of photography, there's been debates and problems around that. And so I'm very cognizant and aware of these. I mean, I think you do have to be. But that's not my particular area of interest, although it has to be in my part of my knowledge.
I find it interesting that you explain the process in which you started working with the kids, like how you go through the school. There's a Martin Parr gave a talk, this was when I was studying, and a lot of his work, the work that I really like is they work at the coast where there's lots of children. So I asked him about the shots of the children and how he went about getting them and things, and he seemed completely baffled by the question. Sort of, maybe I worded it wrong at the time, but because I had parents who were lecturers who worked in arts and in scouts and stuff, I knew that there were all these
model releases and
prohibitions. And he didn't seem to have done any, from what I gathered from what he just took them, you know. But they're so important to those photos, because for me those photos are as much about childhood as the seaside or anything like that. And that process, obviously.
Yes, I mean, I think that, you know, you bring your own, it either bothers you or it doesn't. You know, and that's what I meant, you bring your own morality to it. You know, and I think that that's fascinating. You know, I mean, I think some people will just come at it and it will not be an issue, and on others it will be hugely important, and others it will come to bite them. So, you know, I think the important thing though is not to feel that you can pursue the subject, because I think that, you know, for a lot of sort of young artists, it may be something that they would want to do, but not necessarily feel that they could because it might be too difficult or problematic. I mean, I think that's a shame. I hate to see people told not to do things.
I think these are interesting because I think they're the opposite of that. You know, these two children, you feel there's certain trust that they have toward, there's no kind of, it doesn't feel like the object of their attention is obviously the computer screen, but there's a certain trust there, it's just in their demeanour and their kind of the way they're looking at it, as opposed to it's something that it's something dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that, again, it's like, you know, I was saying that, you know, when you, as an artist, you know, you've got to sort of follow your instinct, you know, you find yourself in these situations, you either feel uncomfortable or comfortable. I mean, uncomfortable for something would be quite useful. But for me, I felt when I started to work in these environments, I thought, this is just right. You know, this is something that I feel is right for me. This is working. You know, and I can still remember going through all the old megs and the transparency sheets in the early work recently and thinking, God, yeah, that was great. You know, I remember that time and I remember thinking, that is bloody good. You know, and it's really very exciting when you find your subject. And actually, I think that, you know, some artists strive for an awful long time to sort of find that. Some people never find it. You know, and I think that for me, I feel fortunate that it's something that I found and something that I'm still very interested in doing. And when I started making this work, I didn't have any children of my own. So it wasn't about, didn't like children particularly. You know, I didn't really think about them. You know, and it wasn't until I was older and had children of my own that I started, of course, that affects the way you work and you start to think differently about your subject. So I've seen it through these different sort of revolutions. So that's really interesting. I mean, I think it's great to stick with something if you can. That's all I can say. It's really good to sort of spend these sort of like moving on to sort of decades. You see things change so much. I mean, I feel very fortunate to have been able to sort of straddle sort of, you know, the analog and the digital, and to be able to document hopefully some of the changes in lives that's, you know, because when I started photographing, as I said, I guess, you know, looking at the photograph of the skaters, you know, they're the same age now as the kids when I started. So I might have started photographing when they were 5, and now I'm photographing when they're 18, 19. That's that generation, that first generation of digital natives. Really interested in sort of following that kind of arc.
I think that's the interesting thing, the documentation of technology and the aging process at the same time. If I just talk with friends who are, say, 4 years younger, and realise that I was brought up with film camera, and I was taught film through that process, and they were taught it through the digital process, and then maybe they came back to film because they was intrigued by it. That's massive, the change in which you initially involve yourself with photography, and so just a few years, because the technology is moving at such a pace, can change how you interact with it, how you engage with it, which I find interesting because I do digital screen arts as my PA.
Right.
So that's how I remember at the time the lecturers talking about how streaming and all of this will be sort of, you know, the future and how you engage with things, and we were like,
And they were right.
Yeah.
I mean, I hated film, I have to say. I mean, I hated shooting in film, just because I had to. Because, you know, what I really loved was the montage, collage. I mean, that's my that juxtaposition, that way of juxtaposing sort of images is what was really interesting. Of course, you know, with the introduction of digital, it was possible to sort of do these things. But again, to do them at very high quality in photography, you had to go through a very particular kind of, sort of route at that time. So, you know, that was interesting.
Hey Wendy, I just wanted to ask you, your pictures and your way of working is really controlled, really staged, but they are not really so much in relation to the idea of film and digital, but this kind of new way of output photographers are working with now. We have photographers who are creating, digital PDFs, or they're showing work on screens and galleries. Do you not find that problematic in terms of your control? Because through your work I read an artist who's very controlled, and to show work in that way is to sort of let loose. Like, for example, even fixing the screen today for the projection, you have to let go of that control. I mean, what that person reads or sees is so variable.
I actually love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always loved that, because for me the important thing is for the images to get out there and to just circulate. I mean, I don't care the sort of how they're used. I'm not really into all the sort of copyright sort of stuff. I just want the images to go out and just sort of seeing it against it. So I think that, yes, I mean, it's like, I'm very anal, in terms of sort of like, I know exactly what I want the construction, but once I've done it, I just love nothing more than to just for people to take it and sort of like reproduce it and recontextualize it, and they do a lot, and that's fantastic. I mean, I think that's where the image for me isn't complete until it happens, so it goes back into that kind of digital stream.
Sort of what you were saying before about when your work is actually put in context with other things. If that's when you realise it has a sort of wider meaning.
And also I think it's a testing place for it. If it's no good, it'll just kind of all nothing will happen to it. But it is, people pick it up and it just gets flip-flopped around, and that part of digital economy I think is really interesting. But I can understand how a lot of photographers hate it, and don't like that. So I think that, being control of the image is one thing, making that sure it's absolutely what you want. But then after that, I think it's just very exciting to sort of let it go out there and see how it kind of operates. Don't you feel that?
No, I get nervous about it. I think I'll probably change my mind about it, as I see others. I'm just not innovative enough, I think, as an artist to maybe go, let's see how that change evolves. But I see kind of a similarity with the way I work in terms of how you work, and there's lots of subtleties in the light, and I often read less in a digital version of it, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's like, on a practical level, like, you produce something like that, it's really expensive to produce.
Yeah, on a practical level, it's
hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's one way of getting the work out, but that's, I mean, it's only one way.
I think in terms of distribution and eyes on work, there's no kind of contest about it. Just in terms of how the work's viewed and read, I think there's an aspect of loss there.
Yes, but I think that you can control how the work is viewed and read, and I think that's an important point. I'm not just saying tip things out there.
Yeah.
I think because for me, obviously I've developed my career and there's a certain context to the work. So when you look at the work, you kind of know what's happening around it. There's other sort of texts and things, people read that. But I think that it's so you have to control that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying just let it all go. I think it's very important to control that, don't get me wrong. I've never put things out unless they were contextualised exactly the way that I wanted. But then after that, obviously, it goes out, and that's exciting.